the Beastmasters of Terra. The training grounds of Fort Ares stretched across a barren wasteland on Mars, a harsh environment where only the strongest survived. Sandstorms howled in the distance as Commander Elias Voss stood at the edge of a reinforced observation platform, his cybernetic visor scanning the battlefield below. A single Drakkar, its sleek, six-limbed reptilian form glistening under the artificial light, prowled through the rocky terrain, waiting for its master's command. Elias tapped a control node embedded in his wrist. A neural impulse surged through his mind, linking him directly to the creature. Strike now. With terrifying speed, the Drakkar pounced on a heavily armored training drone, its serrated claws tearing through reinforced plating like wet paper. The machine's internal servos screamed before it collapsed into a heap of scrap. A smirk played at the edge of Elias's lips. Perfect execution. Behind him, Lieutenant Ava Monroe crossed her arms. You know, if the Threx Dominion saw this, they'd finally understand why messing with us is a bad idea. Elias turned to her. They still think we're weak. That's their first mistake. She scoffed, watching as another Xenobeast, this time a massive titanic mauler, was unleashed on a reinforced bunker. The creature's bio-enhanced muscles bulged as it plowed through layers of steel and concrete, sending debris flying. Soldiers on the ground scrambled out of the way as the hulking brute bellowed a deafening roar. They see us as prey, Elias continued. They don't realize that we've spent the last 50 years perfecting biological warfare, not with chemicals or viruses, but with living weapons. Ava nodded. And when they land on Outpost Erebus tomorrow, they're in for a rude awakening. The war begins. The next morning, the call to battle stations echoed through the Martian military complex. The Threx Dominion fleet had arrived. Elias suited up, his combat exosuit locking into place around his reinforced physique. The Xenobeast Corps, the elite division trained to control and command Earth's genetically modified alien creatures, was already assembling in the deployment bay. A holographic projection flickered to life in front of him, displaying real-time footage from Outpost Erebus, a human colony stationed at the edge of Threx-controlled space. Commander, the voice of General Stavos crackled over the comms. The Threx have begun landing operations. Our defenses won't hold for long. Elias watched the footage with cold precision. The Threx, massive, armored insectoids with razor-sharp mandibles and plasma rifles fused into their carapaces, were advancing across the colony's outskirts. Their war machines, towering quadrupedal walkers bristling with energy weapons, loomed over the battlefield. They expected an easy victory. Elias turned to his soldiers. We move in now. No mercy. His Xenobeasts roared in response. The unleashing. The drop pods cut through the atmosphere like meteors, slamming into the war-torn ground of Outpost Erebus. The moment the doors blasted open, chaos erupted. Elias sprinted forward, his Drakkar beside him, its muscular frame a blur of motion. Behind them, the titanic maulers charged, smashing through Threx formations like wrecking balls. In the skies, Virex swarms descended, their razor-edged wings slicing through enemy ranks like living scythes. The Threx warriors faltered. Confusion turned to horror. Elias raised his rifle and fired a plasma shot straight into the skull of a Threx officer. The alien's mandibles twitched before it crumpled to the dirt. Ava's voice came over the comms. They're breaking formation. They don't know how to fight against creatures that think and adapt. Elias smirked. Then let's make sure they don't get a chance to learn. His Drakkar leaped onto an enemy walker, its claws piercing through mechanical joints, disabling the machine in seconds. Below, a mauler ripped a Threx soldier in half, its cyber-enhanced muscles making short work of alien armor. Within minutes, what should have been an easy victory for the Threx turned into a nightmare of blood and carnage. A fatal mistake. From a command center aboard a distant Threx warship, Supreme Warlord Kothal watched in disbelief as his forces were massacred. His advisors hissed in frustration. This is impossible. How do the humans control alien creatures so efficiently? Kothal's mandibles clacked in agitation. They were supposed to be weak, yet they fight like the devourers of old. One of his generals stepped forward. "Shall we retreat?" The warlord slammed his fist onto the command table. "No, we underestimated them, but we will not lose. Deploy reinforcements and ready the planetary bombardment." His burning red eyes glowed with renewed fury. "If the humans want a war, we will give them one." The blood of Titans. The battlefield of Outpost Erebus had turned into a graveyard of metal and chitin. Alien corpses lay scattered across the ruins of the once thriving colony, their fluids steaming under the harsh binary suns. The stench of burnt plasma, ozone, and something distinctly alien lingered in the air. Commander Elias Voss stood atop the carcass of a fallen Threx warbeast, his breathing steady despite the carnage around him. His Drakkar, still dripping with the blue ichor of its latest kill, prowled beside him, its forked tongue flicking through the air, tasting the scent of fresh enemies. The Threx invasion force had been broken. Their warriors lay in pieces, and their towering walkers now served as burning monuments to human defiance. But Elias knew better than to celebrate too soon. A crackle came through his comms. Lieutenant Ava Monroe's voice was tense. "Commander, long-range sensors are picking up movement in orbit. The Threx fleet is regrouping." Elias clenched his jaw. "They're not retreating, then?" "No, sir," she confirmed. "We intercepted a transmission. They're preparing for planetary bombardment." A cold fury settled in his chest. The Threx were realizing their ground forces couldn't win, so they were opting for the next best thing, total annihilation. Elias turned to his squad. "We need to move. Now." The counterattack begins. The Xenobeast Corps regrouped inside the fortified remains of the Erebus Command Center. Soldiers strapped into their battle gear, weapons humming with lethal energy, while handlers calmed their creatures, preparing them for what was to come. Ava projected a holographic display of the Threx fleet. "They're forming a bombardment line. If they fire, Erebus will be reduced to dust in minutes." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then we take the fight to them." The soldiers around him exchanged glances. One corporal hesitated. "Sir, our ships were grounded in the first wave. We don't have enough firepower to—" Elias cut him off with a feral grin. "Who said anything about ships?" He turned to his Xenobeasts. The Virex swarms, bat-like creatures with bioelectrical wings, chittered in anticipation. The titanic maulers, their muscular bodies enhanced with cybernetic exoskeletons, rumbled with barely contained rage. And his Drakkar, his most trusted beast, crouched low, ready to pounce at the first command. "We're going to take the war to their fleet," Elias declared. "Directly." The leap into space. As the Threx battleships adjusted their orbital positions, readying to unleash devastation, they failed to notice the dark shapes rising from the ruined city below. A massive swarm of flying creatures, each carrying heavily armored soldiers, surged toward the sky like a living missile barrage. The Threx had never encountered anything like it. Their first mistake was hesitating. By the time their gunnery crews realized what was happening, Elias and his forces had already reached the lower atmosphere. The Virex swarms dodged plasma fire, their sleek bodies weaving through the chaos. The Drakkars latched onto the hulls of enemy warships, tearing through metal as if it were soft flesh. Elias landed atop a Threx battlecruiser, his mag boots locking onto the hull. He gave a simple command through his neural link: "Kill." His Drakkar howled, and the creature's razor-sharp claws dug into the ship's exterior, puncturing vital components. Air hissed out in violent bursts, and sections of the hull buckled. Elias moved fast, plasma rifle in hand, cutting down Threx warriors as he made his way to the ship's command center. Inside, Warlord Kothal was watching the battle unfold with a mixture of rage and confusion. His warriors fought desperately, but they had no defenses against this kind of warfare. Human soldiers and their alien war beasts were rampaging through the ship like demons unleashed from hell. A blast door hissed open, and Elias stepped inside, his rifle raised. Kothal's mandibles clicked in fury. "You dare?" Elias smiled. You should have left when you had the chance. Without another word, he fired. The plasma shot ripped through the warlord's chest, sending him crashing to the floor, his body twitching before going still. The battle was over. The Threx fleet, now leaderless and in disarray, began a panicked retreat. Victory, but at what cost? As the last of the Threx warships fled into deep space, Elias stood amidst the wreckage, his body aching, his armor scorched. His Drakkar, ever faithful, nudged his shoulder, sensing his exhaustion. Ava's voice crackled through his comms. "We did it. Erebus is safe." Elias nodded, gazing out into the black void. For now, the war wasn't over. The Threx would be back. But next time, they wouldn't underestimate humanity. The price of defiance. The battlefield was silent, save for the occasional groan of twisted metal and the crackling of fires still smoldering from the brutal combat. The Threx fleet had fled, their forces shattered, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on the shoulders of Commander Elias Voss. His armor was scorched, his muscles ached, and his mind reeled from the reality of what had just happened. They had taken the fight to the enemy's fleet and won. Yet, as he looked around at the ruined remains of Outpost Erebus, he knew this was only the beginning. The Threx weren't just some mindless war horde. They were a galactic power, one that had ruled over dozens of civilizations without challenge. And now, for the first time, they had been humbled by humanity. They wouldn't let that stand. Aftermath of the battle. Elias trudged through the remains of the command center, his Drakkar, Vexus, padding beside him with watchful eyes. Bodies, both human and alien, littered the streets. The air was thick with the scent of burnt plasma, blood, and ash. Ava Monroe, his second-in-command, approached. She was bleeding from a gash on her forehead, but her eyes were sharp. "They're gone," she said. "But we intercepted more transmissions before they retreated. They're calling for reinforcements." Elias exhaled, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Of course they were. "How long?" he asked. Ava hesitated. "A week, maybe less. Their fleet is faster than ours. We barely survived this battle. We won't survive another if we stay here." Elias knew she was right. Erebus was no longer defensible. The colony had once been a thriving human outpost, rich with resources and potential, but now it was nothing more than a graveyard. And if the Threx returned in force, they wouldn't just send another invasion fleet. They would glass the planet from orbit. He turned to his gathered soldiers, their faces grim, their bodies battered. They were warriors, the best of humanity's Xenobeast core, but they weren't invincible. "We need to evacuate," Elias said. "Gather the wounded, get our people on transports. I want every functional Xenobeast prepped and ready." Ava frowned. "Where do we go?" Elias looked toward the sky, where the wreckage of Threx warships still burned in low orbit. "We take the fight to them." A desperate gamble. As the last of the surviving humans boarded the dropships, Elias stood near the wreckage of a fallen Threx command cruiser. The massive warship had crashed outside Erebus during the battle, its hull torn apart, but some of its systems were still intact. "We're not running, are we?" Ava asked, stepping beside him. Elias smirked. "Hell no." The Threx fleet had never expected humanity to fight back the way they had. They had underestimated not just human resilience, but their cunning. Inside the wreckage, technicians worked feverishly to access the Threx data core. If they could break through its firewalls, they could find the exact coordinates of the nearest Threx warworld, a planet dedicated to supplying their endless war machine. Elias's plan was simple. If the Threx were sending reinforcements, humanity would strike first. "We take their warworld before they can regroup," Elias said. "We don't wait for the next attack. We end the war before it begins." Ava stared at him. "That's insanity." Elias grinned. "That's war. The truth of the Xenobeasts." As the technicians worked, Elias walked to the holding bay where hundreds of Xenobeasts were being loaded onto the transports. The creatures were restless, sensing the tension in the air. His Drakkar, Vexus, stood near the entrance, watching him with its golden, slitted eyes. Elias reached out, running a hand over its rough scales. These creatures weren't just weapons. They were partners. The Threx saw them as beasts of war, but humanity had something the Threx didn't. A bond, a connection. Each Xenobeast was linked to its handler through a neural interface, allowing them to fight as one mind, one force. It was something no alien race had ever mastered before. That was why humanity was winning. Not because of numbers, not because of technology, but because they had taken the monsters of the galaxy and turned them into family. The war moves forward. A shout echoed from the wreckage. The technicians had cracked the Threx data core. Ava ran up to Elias, her face pale. "Sir, we have their supply world's coordinates." Elias felt his heartbeat steady. This was it. "Then let's go introduce ourselves." The Xenobeast core wasn't just defending humanity anymore. They were taking the war to the Threx. And this time, the aliens were the ones who would be afraid. The fall of the Threx warworld. The Threx warworld of Zarkon loomed ahead, a dark, metallic behemoth floating in the void of space. It was a fortress planet, covered in massive factories, weapons platforms, and garrisons housing millions of Threx soldiers. No one had ever dared attack it. Until now, Commander Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the UHS Revenant, staring at the holographic display that showed the warworld's defenses. Around him, the bridge crew worked feverishly, preparing for the most daring assault in human history. Beside him, Ava Monroe shifted uneasily. "This is insane," she muttered. Elias smirked. "It's only insane if we lose." The fleet was in position. The Xenobeast carriers were loaded. The time for planning was over. It was time to show the galaxy why humanity was feared. The invasion begins. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace, weapons hot. The Threx were caught off guard. They had expected a counterattack eventually, but not here. Not at the very heart of their war machine. Alarms blared across the Threx defense stations as their ships scrambled to respond. Fighters launched, orbital turrets swiveled, and planetary shields flared to life. But humanity was ready. "All ships, initiate bombardment," Elias ordered. The Revenant's railguns fired first, hurling kinetic slugs the size of skyscrapers toward the Threx defense platforms. The impact shattered entire space stations, sending debris tumbling into the warworld's atmosphere. Missiles streaked across space. Energy blasts tore through the void. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Then came the Xenobeasts, the unleashing of monsters. From the carriers, hundreds of drop pods were launched toward the surface. Each one carried a Xenobeast and its human handler. Elias's Drakkar, Vexus, crouched in its pod beside him, golden eyes glowing in the dim light. The neural link thrummed between them. He could feel its anticipation, its hunger for battle. "Let's give them a show," Elias murmured. The drop pods slammed into the surface, punching through the warworld's defenses like meteorites. As they cracked open, human warriors and their Xenobeasts charged out, unleashing devastation. Drakkars leaped onto Threx tanks, ripping them apart with claws like swords. Titan-class behemoths smashed through walls, their handlers guiding them with precision. The Threx had always believed humans were weak. They thought Xenobeasts were just mindless creatures. Now, they were learning the truth. The turning point. Elias and his strike team pushed toward the Threx Central Command Station, cutting through enemy forces like a blade through flesh. Plasma fire rained down, but his team moved as one, soldiers and beasts fighting as a single, unstoppable force. A massive Threx warlord, clad in ornate battle armor, stepped onto the battlefield. His four glowing eyes locked onto Elias. "You dare bring monsters to my world?" Elias grinned. "No, we bring judgment." Vexus leaped, jaws wide, and the battle began. The warlord was fast, far faster than Elias had expected, but Vexus was faster. The Drakkar dodged a plasma strike, its claws raking across the warlord's armor. Sparks flew. Elias fired his rail rifle, the impact sending the warlord staggering back. Ava and her Titan beast crashed through the side of a building, joining the fight. The Threx warlord roared, but the humans pressed forward, overwhelming him with raw force and strategy. With a final bone-crushing bite, Vexus tore the warlord's throat out. The Threx command was broken. The end of the war. Across the war world, Threx forces were falling. The humans had done the impossible. One by one, defense stations fell silent. The factories stopped churning out war machines. The remaining Threx warlords fled into deep space. Humanity had won. Elias stood at the edge of the ruined command station, watching the Threx banners burn in the firestorm below. "This is just the beginning," Avis said, stepping beside him. Elias nodded. "The galaxy will remember this day." He looked up at the night sky, where human ships now controlled the heavens. Humanity had been underestimated. But now, the galaxy would never make that mistake again.